What's good, BookTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Theo, Rekindled Reader, back with another book review. It's been a minute, and this time I wanted to do a quick off-the-cuff book review on what has become maybe my new favorite sci-fi series. I just read and wrapped up the first 3 books in the Red Rising series, the first Red Rising trilogy. That is Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star, and I couldn't be happier that I finally read these. Oddly enough, I'm doing a review on the first trilogy, and I don't even have Red Rising because I lent it out because some more people need to read it, and I'm kicking myself for not having started it sooner. So I want to tell you all about it, my experience, why I think you should read it. I am going to keep everything non-spoiler in this review, and we'll start with Red Rising. Red Rising is basically the story of Darrow, who is a low-born, bottom of the totem pole, working class red in a society where there's a hierarchy, there's a class system based on color. Golds are at the top, reds are at the bottom. There's a bunch of colors in between that do all sorts of different things within their society and their culture. This is a world 700 or 800 years in the future where moons are lived on, planets are lived on, intergalactic space travel is very common. Earth was conquered long ago, and the society has prevailed, and Luna, or the moon, I think, is sort of at the center of this with a reigning sovereign. It's a very, very interesting, epic space saga type of world. We meet Darrow on Mars. He's a hell diver. He is drilling and digging in the mines. He's one of the best. And Mars is assisting with terraforming the surface of the planet, getting it livable for humans. Some things happen to Darrow, and there are some revelations, and he ends up having to infiltrate the Gold Society from inside. His motivations go in the series from very self-centric to more for society and civilization as a whole, which is kind of cool. That is basically the premise, and the story evolves quite differently from book 1 to book 3. And again, we're just talking about the first trilogy in this series. I really liked Red Rising. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 star because there were a couple areas where it fell short, and I'll tell you all about that. But what's important to know is that I stayed invested from page 1. I couldn't put the book down. It is very fast paced, and it keeps that momentum through the entire trilogy, which is rare. And it's rare for me to roll through a trilogy back to back, book 1, 2, 3, without picking anything else up. And that's what I did with this one. A few areas where I think Red Rising fell a little bit short is that Darrow can come off as a bit of a Gary Stu, a bit arrogant, a bit good at everything. And while it's explained why he's good at certain things and why he may have excelled in certain areas and why even maybe he was chosen to accomplish certain things, very tropey, as you can probably imagine, it's a little bit obnoxious at times. And so Darrow becomes a likable character, but he's a bit of an acquired taste at the beginning, and it takes a little bit of time to really accept him because you are in his head. It's a first-person narrative. So you're stuck with Darrow and his point of view and his reasoning for being the way he is and doing the things he does. I'm not going to get too deep into the plot of each book, but in the first book, it really follows sort of a schoolyard academy. I shouldn't call it the academy. It's actually called the Institute. The academy is something different, but like an institute school training ground for the top of Gold Society. And it's from this institute, graduating from this institute and passing some of these tests, that they go on to being the most revered golds in society. And so this is kind of where the selected, cream of the crop golds go, and where people send their kids to get trained and placed into high level areas of society. So very quickly in the first book, you end up being in sort of a school training setting, and it takes on a thing like a life of its own. It's not similar to other books you've read. It's brutal. It's dark. No life is safe. Everyone has their own motivations. The characters are compelling. There are deeply, deeply flawed characters, very memorable characters. The dialogue is witty and hilarious and a little cringe at times, but it was a fun ride. And I will say the other thing too is Pierce Brown throws a lot of terms at you, like rip wings and grav boots and this and that, whatever. And some things are self-explanatory, some things are less so. And he just assumes that you kind of can just roll with it, suppress your whatever called disbelief, and, you know, just kind of roll with it. You can kind of imagine what these things are, and it doesn't really detract from the story, but some people may have an issue with the lack of explanation. Pierce Brown kind of just lets you imagine what these things might be, and in the context of the story, these things make sense, and they do get explained a little bit more as the narrative continues. But at the beginning, you may be a little bit confused or overwhelmed with some of these terms, but it's very easy to read. The prose is very easy to read. Overall, a very good time. One area that I can nitpick a little bit is the action, which I didn't think was done all that well in the first book in particular. And I feel like I could have gotten a little bit more detail and gotten immersed a little bit more in the action. The books are so fast paced where one thing happens after another, and it's punctuated by really calm moments with introspection and character development, all that stuff. But on the whole, it's very action heavy. And so when you have that, sometimes the detail of certain events can be stripped down. And as an example, there could be a similar passage to like, you know, I flipped aside and then I turned around and I killed these 5 guys. And it's like, okay, well, like how? Like, how did you do that? Like, you swung your sword and killed 5 people. Like, give me a little bit more, you know, detail. And I've written some incredibly compelling action scenes where if I compare this to that, it's a little bit lackluster to me, in particular, my opinion. So in Red Rising, Darrow goes through the Institute and he meets all these call it school friends. They develop these little cliques, and there are houses that, you know, you're placed into these houses and they are sort of competing against each other. I know you're probably thinking Harry Potter. It's not really the same. It is Hunger Games-esque, Ender's Game a little bit, right? Leadership, military tactics, that kind of stuff. But yeah, basically at the end of the book, I'm not going to spoil anything again. You know, a lot has happened and there's a bit of a turn at the end where you're like, oh, wow. Okay, I guess this is where Darrow's going to go. And so you end up wanting to pick up the second book, Golden Sun, pretty much immediately. And this has led to me wanting to read through the whole series back to back because Pierce Brown has very good endings. Fast forward to Golden Sun, where it takes much more of a macro approach. He's training in the academy with fleets of ships. A lot of the same characters are still there. Some aren't. And now we are sort of zoomed out and we get more of a taste of the universe with all the planets and the moons and the different factions and how this society is ruled by this sovereign, Octavia O'Loon, and, you know, how everything might feel like it's supposed to play together. This book as a second book is one of the best sequels that I've ever read. Everything from the first book that made it special gets amplified and improved, and it is absolutely elevated as a sequel, and it's a masterclass in how to do this. The pacing is breakneck. Amidst all that, the relationships evolve, the characters continue to be compelling and evolve, and each have their own separate arcs, and you end up being invested in all these characters, even some of the ancillary characters. You're very curious about their backstory, which gets explored in a lot of cases for some of these side characters. None of the characters really feel like side characters. They all sort of have their own story, their own motivations, their own flaws, everything that makes them good and bad. You really get attached to pretty much everyone, and I was really surprised by that. What's really impressive about Red Rising, this whole series, is that it feels like a really, really tight narrative. There's no extra words, there's no fluff, it's a really, really tight story. But even within that, and all these battles and alliances and betrayals and plot heavy action, it still feels real and authentic. And the characters are so nuanced and everything feels earned. There are moments in here that land with such impact. I teared up in this book twice. One part of the book where a lot of other people probably felt emotional as well. And then I teared up at a part where probably no one else has cried reading this. It was a really touching, heartfelt moment between Darrow and his mom. And it landed so close to home for me. And it was beautiful. There are so many beautiful moments in here. Severo as a character has evolved to be such a gangster. Darrow's complex relationship with Mustang and some of the other, Severo's complicated relationship with everyone. This is a brutal, gut-wrenching, but also emotionally beautiful book. And the ending in this book is one of the craziest, most brutal, most, in a weird way, satisfying endings I've read. I shouldn't say satisfying in a way where it's like, okay, that felt real. That felt like it probably could have and would have happened. Where do we go from here? Do not finish Golden Sun without having Morningstar literally ready to go in your lap, ready to read. You have to continue. This Golden Sun was such a good ending, and it propels the story forward into Morningstar, which was another 5-star read. If it's not clear, Golden Sun was a 5-star for me, and Morningstar was also. Now, this is again a very rare instance where I was so impressed with the fact that every single book continues to get better. The writing evolves and levels up. The dialogue gets better. The action gets more and more intense and fast paced. The relationships continue to get more and more compelling and interesting. There's more and more betrayal to the point where it's almost exhausting, but every character has his or her own motivations. Everything feels earned, and the stakes get higher and higher. And there was always a sense of importance and high stakes. Every moment that is supposed to land in here does. The third book in a trilogy has a really, really important role to play where it can make or break the entire series for you, because it's such a tight story and you really oftentimes remember the trilogy as one story, one package. Particularly with shorter books, they tend to seep into one another, and you tend to remember the story as one and not necessarily separate books. Although it's very hard to not remember each book in this series separately, because so much happens in each one and each one is memorable for different reasons. The third book in a trilogy has a very important role to play where it needs to deliver everything that you've been looking forward to and wrap things up in a way that feels earned and satisfying and makes you look back fondly and probably makes you want to reread the series again, tell your friends about it, and gush like I am in this video. That's what Morningstar does. This is top tier third book in a trilogy stuff. This is exactly what it's supposed to do. The ending in this book, after you go through so much with these people on these different journeys and different battles and follow all these different story arcs, the ending was brilliant. It was beautiful. It was exactly what I wanted. And I didn't even know that that's what I wanted. I had no idea that this is where it was going to go. You develop theories, of course, and you think, okay, like this could happen, this could happen. It was an ending that I didn't know that I wanted, and I didn't know it was an option. If it's not already obvious, this is a huge recommend for me. I went from a 3.5 star, pretty good first entry sci-fi story to a broad scope epic sci-fi saga that is on the whole a 5-star experience for me. It's something that I'm going to recommend. It's something that I'm going to reread, and I cannot wait to continue with the rest of the series. The back half of the series gets a little different, more dark, and I cannot wait. So I just wanted to give you my thoughts on the first 3 books to give you a taste of why I enjoyed it, how my experience was, whether or not I would recommend it, and I do. If you've read it, let me know in the comments what you think. If you've read the other series and the other books, let me know what you think about those. Are you excited for Red God to be released this year, next year? Not exactly sure, but yeah, give me your thoughts down below. Brilliant trilogy, and I'm really glad I read it, and I'm kicking myself for not having tried it sooner. Thank you to everyone who recommended it to me and told me that I'm going to enjoy it, and I hope you will too if you read it, if you haven't yet already. That is it. Just a quick review, guys, for this trilogy. I'll catch you real soon on the next video.